Representative Liz Cheney joins us on KODI. She's taken time out of her day to talk to us exclusively. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, Representative. Let's talk about Russia. Let's talk about Vladimir Putin. The invasion of Ukraine. Are people nervous in Washington, D.C.? What is the tone in Washington, D.C. right now about this Russian invasion?
Well, we are really very focused on it and deeply troubled, as the rest of the country, the rest of the world is. We had a classified briefing last night in the House from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Director of National Intelligence, and I won't go into the details because it was a classified brief, but what I can say is that it is an exceedingly serious and grave situation. We have not had this kind of brutal military invasion on the continent of Europe since 1945. And what you've seen around the world is just a tremendous unity in ways that, I don't know that anybody could have imagined when you've got countries, even Switzerland, for example, Monaco, countries that normally have protected the secrecy of the investments of Russian oligarchs, saying absolutely not. We're going to freeze those assets as well. I think the whole world is watching in horror, and it's really important that the Russians understand that America will defend our NATO allies. Certainly, as the Russian forces attack Ukraine, we're providing weapons and humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian people so they can defend themselves, and they've just been unbelievably brave. And, of course, on the border of Ukraine, you have NATO members, Lithuania, you've got, Latvia, Estonia, Poland. You've got a situation where those members of NATO have an absolute security guarantee from us and with each other. And we will certainly, there should be no doubt that we will absolutely defend all of those NATO members. So it's a very, very serious situation, one that we're certainly taking very seriously.
Representative Liz Cheney joins us on the Bighorn Radio Network on KODI. Can you hold on for 1 minute, and we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back and talk more about Russia. Can you hold on?
Sure, happy to.
Great. Thank you so much. We continue our conversation with Representative Liz Cheney, who's taken time out of her busy day to talk to us here on KODI. And Ms. Cheney, we talked a little bit about how nervous is Russia, or how nervous are we about Russia. What do you want to hear from the president for his State of the Union address? Do you want to hear more sanctions? Do you want to hear more responsibility taken for the Ukraine people? What is it you want to hear tonight?
Well, I want to hear him say that, in the same way that America was the arsenal of democracy in World War II, that, now we're still the arsenal of democracy, but we also need to be the arsenal of energy for the world. And I want to see the Biden administration reverse course on their energy policies that are trying to put bans on oil and gas leases on our public lands, the energy policy that is trying to completely eliminate fossil fuels. It is absolutely irresponsible. Even before what we see happening in Europe, it was absolutely irresponsible for them to be going down a path of rejecting our fossil fuel industry. And now, watching Europe, watching the extent to which Vladimir Putin, his source of income are his energy exports, and that's also his source of power and blackmail. The United States ought to stop importing Russian energy, Russian oil. We also ought to be in a position where, we get back to being energy independent. I want to see the Keystone Pipeline open up. I want to see us moving as quickly as we can to authorize and get approved the export terminals for our LNG. So, I think that, and I will say it's interesting because the administration is facing now bipartisan pressure to do this. I've talked to a number of my Democratic colleagues in the last 24 hours who have said, they also cannot believe the administration would continue down this path of trying to stop fossil fuel production in the United States. It's absolutely counter to our national security interests, absolutely counter to our economic interests. So that's one of the big things that I really want to hear him talk about tonight. Not pushing this green energy agenda that frankly is not capable of meeting our needs in this country economically or from a national security perspective.
If we were to, and by the way, we're talking with Representative Liz Cheney on KODI, if we were to sanction even more and stop getting the imported oil from Russia, wouldn't that spike gas prices here in this country? Would America, do you think, support us doing that in order to make sure that Russia knows that we're dead serious against invading Ukraine?
I think that we can certainly mitigate some of that spike in prices that people see at the pump if we unleash our own energy reserves here in the United States and our own energy resources here in the United States. I think that the devastation that we're watching in Europe and the extent to which it is a threat to the free world, the extent to which you have Putin now saying that he's putting his nuclear weapons on high alert, I think that represents how grave the situation is. And if I might, one other point in that regard, and we have a briefing this morning in the Armed Services Committee about U.S. nuclear forces and the budget for our strategic forces. And I think it's going to be critically important for the Biden administration to understand, to change course, frankly. This is not a time for us to be reducing the size of our strategic arsenal. It's not a time for us to be slowing down the modernization of our forces. We've got to, remember peace through strength, and having the will and the capability to defend ourselves is the best deterrence, best way to make sure that we don't actually ever have to use military force. And so I would also like to see a real change in direction and a change in the numbers for the defense budget. We need to be now looking at these challenges, not just in Europe, but with respect to China. The administration absolutely ought to stop the talks that they're engaged in to re-enter the Iranian nuclear accord. All of those things that, many of us have been advocating for are now even more important and more clearly important when you see the threat and you see what's happening between Russia and Ukraine.
So, Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming, representing the great state of Wyoming, when do we use military force? When does it get so bad that we have to step in militarily, do you think? And do you see that happening in the next year or so? Well,
I think that there's bipartisan agreement that we want to avoid, getting into a situation where you have U.S. forces engaged with Russian forces. And I think everybody recognizes that is, something that we need to do everything possible to avoid. We need to understand, though, that when it comes to NATO member countries, the ones I mentioned before, we absolutely will defend those. And, Russia should be under no illusions that they can continue their aggression and try to roll into these NATO countries. I think Lithuania is of particular concern because of where they are. They've got Kaliningrad on one side, which is a part of Russia that's cut off from the rest of Russia. And I think that obviously NATO countries is a very clear line. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide military support to the Ukrainian people and to provide humanitarian support. But, they're asking us for ammunition. They're asking us for helmets. They're asking us for Stinger missiles and for javelins. And we need to be getting those to them as quickly as possible. So what history teaches us is that appeasement is provocative and it doesn't work. And so we have to stand very firm in order to deter violence, in order to deter war, and have the best possible chance to make sure that Russia doesn't succeed here.